All right, you're going to have to brace yourself and bear with me because this is super fucking boring. A common design pattern. So when you're doing software development, there's going to be a lot of things that you do over and over again. So these are going to be bundled up into common design patterns, right? We're not going to reinvent the wheel every single time. There's a bunch of different ones of these, but for the sake of this book, we're only going to learn two. Thank God. So the first one that we're going to look at is the model view controller pattern. This is really important because it was the first to use the SOC principle. The SOC principle is used to decouple application interdependencies and functions from its other parts. Basically, what it does is it breaks things, it breaks bigger things into smaller parts. Let's look at the model view controller pattern. Broken into three parts: the model, view, and the controller. So the model is responsible for retrieving and manipulating data. It's often tied to a database when we're talking about the data that it's pulling. It doesn't have to necessarily be a database. It usually is, but it could actually just be like a text file that's the data. The view is what the end user sees. So like when you're on your computer, you're viewing it. You know, it could be like a web page. It could be like text on a CLI. The view is just what renders the data. And then the last component is the controller, and that sits between the user and the backend. So it receives a request from the people, and it updates to the model, and then the model notifies, and then that updates the view. So I made another extremely impressive 4K diagram. All right, so we're going to start at the view. That's you kind of sitting in front of your computer. And then number one is the user action. So you type something in on a website, and that goes up to the controller. Then the controller sends the update down to the model, which is the backend database. And then that pulls whatever, based on whatever input that you put in, it sends a notify back to the controller, and then the controller sends an update to the view. Simple. The second one that we're going to talk about is the observer pattern. And this is sharing data from one object to many. So it's broken into the subject and the observer. So the subject is the data that's being observed. This is the data that's going to be synchronized to the observer. The way this works is actually a change event happens to the subject. So let's say your subject is your code, and you send a change event, and then you want to have that all updated to whatever other observers were. So that's going to send a notify message down to the observers, and then that's going to sync. And one thing that's important about this is that the observers only sync when they're told to by the subject. So the observers are not actually pulling constantly to the subject. And that's it. And hopefully we don't have to do any more boring shit, and we can actually start doing something on a computer.